FIME and client list, to try to get into a plea agreement, that she was more than willing to testify in front of Congress about that. And right before we hit record, I kind of gave some news for our panelists to kind of digest. Laura Trump, who, again, is important to highlight, does not hold any government position. She is not either associated with the FBI, the Trump administration, the DOJ, has stated that apparently the Trump administration will release more files related to the Epstein case. She said that in the Betty Johnson show. And so that's something that we wanted to bring up. But, this breaking news from Ghislaine Maxwell follows what we saw earlier in the weekend on Friday and now, in which there was a lot of tensions within the Department of Justice and the FBI leadership, right? There was conversations that Dan Bongino was going to resign if Pam Bondi still stays in the AG's office. The Attorney General, President Trump, made it clear that he has full faith in Pam Bondi. And then he even went on Truth Social to make a post basically saying, why are people continuing to talk about the Epstein files? There is no additional information. And if anything, this is a Democratic plot to split MAGA. We saw in Turning Point USA, actually during our last live stream, I remember showing it here to our panelists, where I think it was Laura Ingraham was saying, to the audience, to a lot of MAGA, as Turning Point is a key component of that, highlighted, if you're upset about this, please, applaud or boo if you're, and the room was heavily against it, and there was clearly a split on that. So with that actual point, David, let me go to you, my fellow co-host for this episode, and say, are you seeing the same? It does look like MAGA is not pretty happy right now.
Well, I was at the Turning Point event this weekend in Tampa, Florida, the Student Action Summit. A great event. But yeah, the thing everybody was talking about this weekend. I mean, look, when you're at a conservative event, you have all the big pundits, you have a lot of the politicians, and you can kind of get a feel for what's kind of trending, And I did a bunch of shows, and the number one, everyone, Epstein. I mean, it was nonstop. And so this definitely is consuming MAGA at the moment. That being said, let me kind of back up and go forward, because the news has been crazy over the weekend. Don't forget, over the weekend was when the news dropped or just before the weekend, that Dan Bongino had this big fight with somebody in White House. They thought initially it was Pam Bondi, but then it turned out to be Susie Wiles, apparently, according to some reporting. He storms out. Basically, it's like Pam or me. Then we get additional information, this Maxwell supposedly willing to talk to Congress. And then, of course, a few minutes ago, the Laura Trump thing. It's almost like this story won't die. And you say, why? Is it the Democrats trying to keep it in? The Democrats are talking about Medicaid still. I don't know. This story is going to have legs, I think, because the messaging has been sort of inconsistent. So when you play that game, you remember Mad Libs, that you pick up that little book and it has blanks in it and you put in the funny words and at the end you have a totally different story. I think what we're seeing is a real life Mad Libs play out where they're not really sure what the messaging is on this. I think eventually the messaging will become a little bit more consistent and we'll have a better understanding about what's going on. But here's the reality. A lot of people are suggesting we should have a press conference with Pam Bondi. My answer to that is, if you have no answers, what's the point of holding a press conference? And I do think this weekend, when Trump doubled down on his support for Pam Bondi, I do believe his support is authentic. I don't think his support for Pam Bondi is because he's engaged in some sort of cover-up. It's possible that if these files existed, they're probably gone. But nevertheless, Trump has wanted to move on from this because it's distracting from so many big wins. And so to kind of bring it a full circle and to get it over to the panel, you do have to wonder, what is these Epstein files? What is Laura Trump now out there saying? Because somebody's making a phone call around. What are you talking about, Laura? What are the files she's referring to? And even Maxwell, she was talking about client lists. She's suggesting that she will testify to Congress who was on the quote-unquote client lists, right? If she does, by the way, that'll probably be in a closed-door session. Nobody will find out what it is because of the prejudicial nature of the testimony that can come out of that without any actual investigations or indictments. But that being said, man, I don't know. I think this Epstein thing won't die. I think the people that don't want it to die don't want it to die for very specific reasons. And with that, let's see what the panel says.
And actually, David, let me because in the last episode we had, I know we had Josiah, and I think that is a perfect point in how you did it, because let me direct the first for his initial reactions to that, because when you look at the Trump Truth Social post that happened, it was the first time he was, quote, ratioed, where there was basically more comments than, I don't know what they call it, reposts, truth posts, whatever, or likes.
Retruths. On truths, it's retruths and comments and likes. Yeah.
Retruth. Thank you. And if you looked at it, it was, people were furious.
Yeah.
And so, Josiah, I think, let me ask you this, to David's point, this won't die. Let's be real. There was major news today in a geopolitical sense. Trump's with NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte, basically more aid to Ukraine, saying 50 days, if not secondary sanctions against Russia, endorsing Lindsey Graham's sanction package. Like, in the international geopolitical sense, now the U.S. is doubling, if not tripling down. But that is not carrying any weight. And it looks like one of the main reasons the Epstein case is not over is, if anything, I would argue, much more on the conservative media and the MAGA base than really anywhere else. So, Josiah, how can Trump move on from this if his base and the Republicans, conservatives, Turning Point USA are saying Epstein, Epstein, Epstein?
He can just wait them out. I mean, the reality is that there's a whole influencer grift economy, which is really heavily rooted in pitching this sort of Gnostic online cult. I have secret knowledge about the doings of the elites and the pedophiles, and I'm going to pitch that to you. Sign up for my Substack for $10 a month. And these people, to have turn out that the documents they claimed existed for all these years actually either were tampered with, destroyed, some sort of corruption happened. I honestly think if Epstein really was a member of an elite global cabal and they were able to murder that guy inside of a Bureau of Prisons, maximum security holding center, the idea that those people could then delete files and get rid of stuff they didn't want, very plausible. So, I think right now it just reveals there's a lack of seriousness among much of the commentariat. It's not a real issue. It's not going to be a 2026 campaign issue, I don't believe. I think right now what you're seeing is there are big political things happening. Trump is right to be mad that it's distracting from wins that he's delivering on his agenda. And ultimately, Epstein isn't about Epstein. It's about the faith that the American people have in institutions and their leadership. Under Biden, we saw a massive decline in legitimacy among major institutions. Now that Biden is out, the way to recover that legitimacy is by delivering results for the American people. Donald Trump has done that in the big, beautiful bill. He's doing it on immigration. There are ongoing fights in foreign policy and law and order, which will continue to draw attention. But if Trump delivers on those promises, then this story is going to die. And let me tell you this right now. If Pam Bondi wants to save her skin, she should go and arrest Anthony Fauci today. And I guarantee you we'll be talking about something else. And I think that would be better for the country as a whole.
David, yeah. I think that's I was interested when I saw this because I saw a lot of people reacting, some eyebrows. And if it's okay with you, I want to go to the first one that I think had a more visceral reaction to that. Jay said,
real quick, Stefan, if I may, I want to comment on that because it was actually a brilliant point, the waiting it out thing and the other topics that come up, because that is exactly, I think, why the administration has been kind of quiet on this. People will get it's almost like you can't undo if you make a mistake. Now, I think mistakes were made. Again, that phase one release, I think certain things weren't handled the best way. I think the smartest thing you can do now is not make any more mistakes and simply wait it out, because I agree. The only thing that becomes a 2026 issue is further mistakes relating to this issue. But yeah, Anthony Fauci, that was discussed today, that they're looking into him now, and that really would pivot the conversation. But with that, yeah, let's go over. Who did you want to go to, Stefano?
I feel like Jason had the most visceral disagreement with that statement, so I'll go to Jason for his initial comments.
Cool.
First of all, let me agree with a portion of what he said. I think the reason that this story isn't going away is because a lot of his base, this was their first taste of, a reality conspiracy amongst billionaires and their associates and high political figures, Holly weirdos, and pedophiles. Okay. And through that, a lot of them bought into the QAnon sense. They think white hats are coming, fairy tales and unicorns, and Trump is Superman. That's not reality. What really actually happened was it was through the outcry that an intelligence asset and his team basically after being caught in Miami, okay, an arms dealer, all right, they tried to bifurcate it with just Ghislaine Maxwell and him. And now there are all these other distractions. We've talked about how, the Diddy case is not the same, but they've tried to make it into the same. People want to talk about things that they cannot prove. There are a ton of documents right now on Court Listener that anybody can look into. And I would say this, if you want to understand how these networks work, and one in which Epstein was more than likely a part of in the 80s, look into the BCCI banking scandal, because it encompassed all of this. And a lot of people don't understand that the current Epstein Victims Fund is mainly through JP Morgan Stanley and their internal emails. And furthermore, Nick will probably talk about this. If you wanted that money, if you were good enough to actually be a victim of Epstein, that they deemed that you could get this, you have to sign non-disclosure agreements. Okay, so you ask why people can't talk about that. Remember, we haven't had any criminal investigations, let alone successful prosecutions, into any high-level government figures or those assets in the past 4+ decades. And if the people find out that the last time we did Iran-Contra, Epstein was an integral part of that with his buddy Adnan Khashoggi, who mentored him and was a part of that, who was doing business with Epstein in the 80s, that will be a huge scandal amongst the blackmail and the foreign intelligence. Again, when you look at Iran-Contra, it was Israel that was getting the weapons from Eastern Europe and then shipping them down. It's a proxy network. And I'll leave it at that, because I don't think they can wait this one out. They can pivot, like David said, to something else people are very upset about, Anthony Fauci. But this story will continue to live on, because forget about the FBI documents or other intelligence documents. There's a paper trail on this guy that's out there, and it's only because of that paper trail and people like Nick who got the Black Book published and the flight logs published back in 2015 that we've even gotten this far, gentlemen.
But let's talk about that, right? So 2015 flight logs are published, right? The information from the Black Book or whatever. So there's information out there. There's been investigations. 2 people sit in jail. At what point, though, is it enough? Like, I understand that they want names and they want people to pay, but the thing is, what this administration has told you, and we've talked about this on so many shows, is that this administration said, we have given you everything we have. We don't have anything else. This investigation is closed at this point. And then from here, though, it's not that that nothing can be done. Congress has the power to investigate. They can create evidence. There's a suggestion that evidence was created and possibly destroyed by previous administrations. I don't know if that's true or not. But what I'm suggesting is, if the evidence doesn't exist to put anybody else in jail, well, now you have to find the evidence, and that means Congress can investigate. That means people can do FOIA requests if they think the government is holding information and not releasing it. There's other ways to go and try to find information, but the problem is, at the end of the day, is you have people begging and screaming for something that's impossible to get at this point. And if they're never going to move past it until they get something that at the moment is impossible to get, I just don't understand where the energy is going. Yeah, I'm not sure who said, can I jump in on this? But yeah, absolutely.
Brian.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Thanks, David. So a couple things on what you specifically said, but I kind of try to divide this up into 3 buckets. There's the conspiracy intel bucket, there's the this case bucket, and then there's the victims bucket. And I'm kind of sad that I'm the 5th person to speak, and I'm the first person to mention that these victims have a stake in this too, dead and alive. And the idea that we're going to just look away and move on with no accountability for those victims, I think that's wrong. But here's a fact, okay? We know there's information that the administration has that they haven't made public. And the reason we know, there's many reasons. One reason we know is that they handed out binders to influencers that had documents that Biden had released that still had redactions in them. So at a minimum, they could release those documents unredacted. Now, I will tell you, as a constitutional lawyer and a prosecutor, there's a lot of reasons why you might not want to do that. But the one thing they cannot honestly say is there's not more information. We know there is.
Well, that's true. And that's a good point, but you're exactly right. The information that's there, and I agree with you, the accountability for the victims, that's what everybody wants. Obviously, there's a lot of people, that's exactly what this is about. There was kids, there was minors, and people want justice. There's probably no more offensive thing that you can do in society than do something like this to a child. And it is really the ultimate sin. But that being said, people do want accountability. But is it on Trump if he doesn't have the ability to deliver that accountability? Does it all fall on him? Remember, Jeffrey Epstein's been doing this for decades. And so it almost seems unfair in a sense that the buck is somehow stopping with Trump. And I think, though, and I understand the counter argument to that is going to be, well, why did he say he was going to release it if he didn't have it to release? Maybe he thought he had something he didn't. But to release the unredacted things, Brian, and I agree with you, who knows what names are in there that can't be released for the various reasons that people can take it upon themselves to assume that just because something appears in those files that suggests that they've done the worst thing in the entire world, and that might not be the conclusion that you can lead to in there. So, but it's an excellent. I understand your point. Yeah.
Can I ask also another follow-on question to Brian though, because it's something I wanted to ask you. I think I heard you in a space yesterday, but you said it to right now. You kind of alluded to kind of the intel conspiracy, right? And you kind of alluded, and I think this is kind of what Jason was saying about this aspect of Jeffrey Epstein being an intel asset. I've been in a live stream. I've been very skeptical of that claim, and that's the reason why there's kind of either a cover up or something's hidden. From your experience, would you believe that Jeffrey Epstein would fit the mold of an intelligence asset, even for blackmail purposes? Why did you say that to you feels that's like more of a conspiracy theory when a lot of people would say, I think this is the reason why they haven't released more, because he was a CIA, Mossad, or whatever plant, and they're trying to cover that up?
So I think you want to separate U.S. intelligence agencies and foreign intelligence agencies. And I'm not commenting on what a foreign intelligence agency might do. I'm not saying they're guilty. I'm not saying they're innocent. But what I know for sure, having served in the CIA under Reagan and Clinton and Bush 43, is that one, and first of all, there is absolutely no history since the Church Pike Committee hearings in the 70s of the CIA or any other U.S. intelligence agency ever extorting or blackmailing anyone, period, full stop. No evidence. I'm not saying it's impossible. I see your eyes roll, Jason. I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm saying there's no evidence, number one. Number two, I have both written presidential findings on intelligence operations, and I've received them when I was working for Condi Rice. Any operation like this, where you are going to recruit a U.S. citizen to be a covert agent for decades, would have been reported not once, not twice, if you go back to the 80s, 8 times to 8 different administrations and 8 different Congresses. And this is the United States. This is a partisan environment. No chance that doesn't leak. You have to imagine a conspiracy of 8 presidents and 8 times 8, 64 members of Congress at least. I don't buy it. Number 3, if this was a thing, and if there was this conspiracy that could reach into a federal prison and have an inmate murdered, they certainly would have murdered Ghislaine as well. And here's one last thing, and I'll ask, and you can ask me anything about here's another thing too, sorry. The Southern District of Florida, like all federal courts, has the ability to run criminal trials when there is CIA or other classified information involved. There's a federal law that does this. It's called the Classified Information Procedures Act. I litigated 3 cases in the Southern District of Florida under this law. So the idea that even suppose he was an intelligence asset, which I don't think he was, all these cases still could have been tried. And Acosta's bullshit that intelligence told him not to do it doesn't work that way. Last point. If a member of Congress or the Senate wants to conduct what we in the intelligence business call an ops test today, they could go, Marjorie Taylor Greene or Hakeem Jeffries could go to the federal penitentiary in Tennessee or send a staffer, ask to visit her. And if the government blocks that, you're going to know a lot.
So with that, let me go to somebody that might, I assume, because and I know there's a lot, so we want to go. So let me go to Dave. I think you might disagree with that based on some of the reactions and all that. And look, I'm all for it, man. So take it away.
So I can't categorically say that Epstein was Mossad, but I think the most plausible explanation was that he was either a Mossad asset or connected to Mossad in some way, and that's just from his associations with Ehud Barak, who lived on his property, visited about 30 times, his connection with Robert Maxwell, the most prominent spy in Israeli history, was given a state funeral on it, and Alex Acosta's famous statement. I don't have to go into that. A lot of us know that, but I'll just say this cover-up seems to be a bipartisan affair. For all the theatrics brought about by the Trump administration and its supporters, saying that Trump would be the white knight to bring prosperity and transparency into Washington, it doesn't look to be the case. This is a rift in MAGA. You're seeing it play out right now, more so, I think, than the schism with Musk and the Iran strike, actually. And David was so right, David, when you said that the Democrats' response to this is to talk about Medicaid. They have the silver bullet against the Trump administration right now, and it's to talk about a sex trafficking ring that involved the most prominent people in government. But they had it in Trump's first term too at the beginning, but instead they relied on the Russiagate hoax and all the absurdity that came with that. So here's what I'll say to round this out. Dan Bongino, if you have a problem with Bondi and how she's handling this, or Wiles, be a hero, be a whistleblower, and tell us. Because if Bondi goes down and we still don't have answers, nothing changes. People are going to clamor about this. I think Bondi is something of a red herring in this. And last thing I'll say is that the client list and the death information, things regarding that are still ambiguous, are important. But the real elephant in the room, the thing that everyone wants to know, that's probably the most important, is which intelligence service or services did Epstein work for? They didn't even address that in the memo. So that's where I'll end. Thank you, guys.
You know, there was a great interview that we conducted on Mario's channel with John. I think you pronounce his name Kiriakou. He was a former CIA analyst, and I know Brian's like, no, but it was actually a really intelligent discussion about how he could have been an asset from Assad and the reason for it. And it was a very interesting discussion. I recommend you going and checking that out on Mario's channel. It was a great interview. It was on, I believe it was Friday.
Hey,
but to your point,
Dave, just real quick. Sorry. People can go to my timeline. John Kiriakou himself said that what he did in exposing his fellow agents was immoral and lies. He swore to that when he got sent to prison. So believe him if you like, but I don't.
Well, I'm not saying believe him or not. I'm just saying if you want to hear his take on it, is an interesting interview. But but that being said, I want to pivot back to your point, Dave. I think the reason why the Democrats are talking about Medicaid, though, and not using this quote unquote silver bullet is twofold. One, as I think it might have been Brian who made the point early on, or it might have been Jason, and it was a good point. They're not going to be talking about this in 2026. And so they're really pivoting for the 2026. And by hitting that Medicaid thing over the head and trying to get people to believe something that's not true, that is really why they're not touching this. The second reason is Biden would be just as implicated, and Democrats are just as implicated as Trump if you try to suggest that there's a cover-up. So there's no value here either. Everybody's like, no. I don't want to have anything to do with this. Look, Trump just even mentioned trying to get to the bottom of it, and now this is squarely on his desk. Nobody wants to touch this thing because of the frustration around exactly what we're talking about. You're talking about cover-ups, if it's intelligence or not intelligence. Everybody has an opinion on it. It's dealing with very graphic subject matters. Nobody wants to touch this anymore. It's the thing that won't go away. Like Trump said, why is everyone still talking about this? People are going to be talking about this forever. But I don't think the Democrats even want to touch it because they don't want fingers pointed their way either. But but an excellent point. Cricket, I want to bring a female voice into this. What say you and everything you've heard so far? All the what we have, what we don't have, what you're expecting, what are your disappointments? What do you think?
Honestly, David, I'm having difficulty controlling my face when you talk because
Why?
I just can't believe the takes that you have when you look at the Epstein case and you're like, oh, it's about messaging or it's about people don't care. Everyone cares. And I
didn't say people didn't care. I did not. I said it was a messaging problem. I didn't say people didn't care.
But Democrats are talking about it. The leadership and the people in Congress who honestly are probably implicated, they're not talking about it. And that's a problem. That is a problem that the American people care about and should still be talking about. And this is the one issue that this is where Trump has actually united the country, because I have been in MAGA spaces, I've been in liberal spaces, and everyone cares about the Epstein case. Everyone wants to know, because unlike what you're saying where, oh, there's just nothing to see here.
Hold on. Don't put words in my mouth, Cricket. I didn't say there's nothing to see. I didn't
You
say I
said
think
that
everybody should.
Trump
Everybody should be upset about. What I said is very specifically, and it's recorded. What I said was there might not be any evidence. They've given what they had to give. What more can he do? Is what I said. And I said if
that is
anybody
not what
wants,
Trump said.
it is
Trump
true. It's
said,
recorded.
Don't look at this anymore.
What?
So
No,
said-
it's not what I said.
No,
Cricket,
but
let me go to you though, to that point though, because I think there's two ways to analyze. Because I would disagree. We have seen Democrats really push this against Donald Trump. We have seen Democratic members. We have seen. I even think the DNC created a bot on Twitter that literally it tracks if the case files have been written. And I think that is what's messaging. But I think there's two ways to analyze. When this first broke, when the AG Bondi released that memo that was leaked by Axios, and the first space we had here in the live stream, I said there's two explanations. It's either a cover-up, number one, which I think everybody agrees, one way or another, the reasoning went, or number two, which I think is kind of what, in a way, just and David are alluding to, was they overpromised. They leveraged this political crisis, this lack of trust in the American people, because it's important to remember Trump was president during the first term. Like when this happened, this all happened under President Trump in the first term, right? This didn't happen under Biden. It was Trump. I think the problem is he would have known. He leveraged this for political reasons. He managed a lot of the people that are now in, especially the leadership of the FBI, really ran on this. And I think when they got into the positions that are at and they looked at it, they're like, oh my God, we've been played and we've played our base. How do we escape from this? How do we escape from overpromising, saying there's all this going on, the list and blah, blah, blah. And now they just have nothing else to do to say there's nothing more. And so it's either a cover up or they basically played their political voters in their base, and now they don't know how to cover up for it, or not cover up. That's the right term. They don't know how to pivot away from it because their base is the ones who are going to be the most adamant that there's definitely much more there, because they created that after 6 years. They created this notion of this deep secret, and now they can't walk away from that.
I think you bring up a great point, Sitrep. And in addition to that, what we see is Trump did not say, we overpromised after looking into it. This is what we have. This is what we don't. What he said is, why are we still talking about it? It was dismissive. It completely undermined what was happening in the country. And it made it seem like, all right, why is there a distraction here? So if there was some forthrightness, then maybe we could get past it. But at this point, people want answers, they want accountability, and they want to know where that's going. And honestly, I consider myself a moderate. I am seeing that from both sides of the aisle, at least from the people. The politicians, I'd like to see more outrage vocally and publicly.
Let me ask you though, Cricket, and then I'll throw it over to sorry, I can't see names here. Here, let me ask you a follow-up on it real quick, because and I agree with you, and I want to be very clear. I don't think this is an issue that we should just simply move on to. I would like to see accountability. There are real victims that deserve justice, and I said this earlier. The issue is we found ourselves in a very frustrating situation that we don't have any more information. Now, this wasn't information the Biden administration put out. It wasn't the administration the Trump first administration put out. It wasn't the information the Obama administration put out, or Clinton. I mean, this has been going on for 20 years, right? 20 years there hasn't been justice for these victims. So the issue is, how can we, quote unquote, give people answers if we don't have them? So yes, maybe Trump can go out and say, I'm sorry, I wanted to release information, I just don't have it. And maybe that would have been the right approach. I don't know. But the reality is, this is an impossible situation unless we get more information. And as of right now, Donald Trump's Justice Department says, this is all we have. So people can be upset and want justice, but where is it going to come from unless people take it upon themselves to request FOIA information, do the research, do like Jason does, do a deep dive and connect the strings. Jason probably has a corkboard in his house with strings attached to it and pictures on it and markers and highlighters, like things hanging from the ceiling. People can do that. And then if you find something credible, take that information, give it to the media. We have X now. They're not going to hide it and say, here's what I found. Look into these people, Justice Department. We don't have that other than what Jason has produced. What we need is the Congress, a bipartisan congressional committee. Why not? Congress can do this. They don't need Trump, by the way. Congress does not need Trump to put together a commission to investigate why we never arrested anybody other than Maxwell and Epstein. They can do that. And the information look, we did a 9/11 commission. We did a January 6th commission. We did a Who Does President Trump's Laundry commission. We could do an Epstein commission. But nobody's doing anything. And to say Trump, this is all on Trump because he doesn't have anything. I agree there's probably a better way we could have messaged it. But at the end of the day, we need more that we don't have. And Stephen, let me ask you. I mean, what's your take? What can we give to people?
Follow-up question.
Oh yeah, go ahead, Cricket, and then I'll go over to Steve. So the question to you then, Cricket, is what can we give people? Is anybody going to be happy no matter what with what we have?
Absolutely. I don't think that people are being unreasonable or overly demanding at all with this. Like, are we ever going to make it okay for the victims? No, of course. It's a terrible thing that happened, and it happened over decades, like you said. It is, but there were a lot of people involved. And the thing is, we were told that this was being investigated.
It was investigated, Cricket, though. It was investigated.
2 people. We have
correct.
So in there, we have victims, we have names, we have flight logs, we have places where
and you've seen those
strength of the FBI that should have been thrown at this to investigate. There's forensic accounting. To think that we don't have people descriptions, that we don't have the ability to look into it at all, or have any sort of, joint. I agree, we could do a Congress joint session, but Trump campaigned on this. This was his thing. He said, I'm going to release this.
And he
this
did.
Is something I'm promising you. So now he has to be held accountable for that promise.
But that's not fair, Cricket.
Tucking his tail between his legs.
But no,
then that's fine. Let us then choose to accept it or not. But to just say, not my problem, or look the other way.
Not my problem.
I
didn't say look the other way. He says, I've given you.
That is how I'm interpreting.
I understand. But the thing is, to
answer your question, and then I will pass it on to Stephen.
Yeah.
I don't think people are being unreasonable. And I think if they were given any sort of actual information in a clear way and some transparency, I think people would be a lot more satisfied than they are right now.
But to be clear, again, it wasn't just Trump. No, Trump's been off for 6 months. It wasn't just Trump's DOJ. Epstein is in jail, not from Trump's DOJ.
When Epstein was unalived.
Okay.
4 years and 6 months.
Yeah, but the point is, there have been multiple DOJs that have been involved in this, right? Not just Trump's. Trump said he would be transparent and deliver the Epstein document, the files. He put out what he had, and he says, sorry, guys, I don't have anything else. And a lot of people are like, well, you do. You have the redacted, information.
You're putting out what he had is saying it doesn't exist.
The documents that they gave those influencers were documents that had already been released by Biden, and they've released nothing more, not even the redactions to those documents. So it's just not true to say he's given out everything he has.
No, I'm not saying it. I'm not saying it could be. If he's given everything he has, he may have purported to have something that he didn't have because he didn't know what he didn't have. That's possible.
David, can I just jump in on that point quick? Even his own lawyer, Dershowitz, who's seen the documents and represented Epstein, says all the documents are not out. I mean, that's within and I'm no Dershowitz fan, but he also says he knows people in the video that have not been named.
But why haven't they been named?
The idea. See, Biden didn't even, quote unquote, release anything. He just unredacted some things that had already been released in 2017 and 2019 that were part of civil cases in the prior criminal case. So I just want to clarify that.
But getting rid of redactions is releasing information.
So can I actually, let me go to Stephen with this then, though. I think this is the point. I think this is the problem. And this has been a consistent narrative. And again, whatever initial take you want to give, run with it. Please give me your initial take on whatever topic, because you still haven't spoke, so I apologize for that. But I think I want to just leverage something that Cricket said, and I think everybody, there's a lack of trust in the Trump administration. There's a severe lack of trust. And the lack of trust in this, though, is not coming from the Democrats, the liberals, with the Russiagate or whatever, however you want to frame it. This is coming from his base. I mean, we have Steve Bannon, with the panel, one of the speakers that he asked a question, who identified as America First, who identified as MAGA, basically said, if Trump can't protect our children, I'm paraphrasing more or less, but he basically then said, Trump is the deep state. And I think that's the problem. It's that he might lose. And it's like this, if you ran on this, you bring the people in who leverage this in their podcasts, and now you're in power and you're not delivering. You have a lack of trust. And I think I've talked about this in a previous session we did this is where Elon Musk can just come right in and say, see, people, you cannot trust Donald Trump or whoever it may be. And that might resonate with voters within America First who might say, you know what, you're right. I can't trust Donald Trump because of this case, which for me is the straw that broke the camel's back. Stephen?
Well, I think from a libertarian perspective, if the FBI can't protect life, liberty, and property, it's unfit to exist and should be abolished. The level of trust in the intelligence community is at an all-time low. Look back in the 60s, we discovered that the FBI sent a suicide package to Martin Luther King to try to get him to kill himself. Of course, you had MK Ultra experiments. You had many examples of the CIA and all these black budget programs and cover-ups, the NSA cover-ups, and everything Snowden came out with. I mean, trust in institutions is at an all-time low. And I think a lot of Americans are picking up on that with this whole Epstein thing. For Trump to come out and essentially gaslight his base and saying that, well, this was a DNC fabrication from the Biden administration, the Clinton administration, it's just so crazy. It's like we were always at war with Eurasia. It's trying to change people's minds, something that he was very vocal about. And now they're turning around and saying, well, we have the files on our desk. Just kidding. Actually, we don't have the files. You've had the files all along. There are no files. Jedi mind trick. It's created so much confusion, I think, in Trump's core base and the whole MAGA sphere. And I can tell you, I know a lot of libertarians who voted for Trump on the promise of, we would stop the war within 24 hours with Ukraine. We would decrease the size and scope of government, tackle the debt, no more foreign wars, et cetera, release the Epstein files. And over the past 5 or 6 months, every single one of those promises has turned null and void. And I'll tell you, as far as Epstein goes, between Bank of America, JP Morgan Chase and the Epstein's Victim Compensation Fund, they paid out a third of $1 billion to victims. So to say that Ghislaine Maxwell and Epstein were the only ones that imparted a third of $1 billion in damages just doesn't make any sense. There's something much more to this story. I think that, quite frankly, there's so much distrust in the entire government apparatus, whether it's intelligence agencies, congressmen, the presidency itself, that Americans just don't trust any part of it. And to turn around and say, there's nothing to see here, it just further increases that distrust in government. And I think we're seeing a big schism in MAGA's base. And I think for a lot of people who supported Trump, we're only an eighth of the way through his term. A lot of them are turning his back on him, especially over this. I think this is where a lot of people draw the line.
Hey, quick breaking news thing, SitRep. The Department of Justice has now filed their response in the U.S. Supreme Court to Ghislaine's request for a retrial. And perhaps not surprisingly, but just to have it in the public record, they are opposed to the Supreme Court even taking her case, much less considering a retrial.
So if I may, for those who, because we have a lot of people from around the world, a lot of people who don't know about American judiciary, can you kind of give like layman terms from the DOJ's language? What are they trying to say, Brian, to everybody? Basically, are they not trying to release anything? They want this case shut, done, never to move on. What does that mean to the American, like to people who don't know, Supreme Court language and all that?
Yeah, it's a good question, especially from people from Western Europe, because in Western Europe, in a lot of cases, the prosecutors and the judges are in the same branch of government. Not true here. The judiciary, which the Supreme Court is the head of, is entirely separate from the executive who runs the Justice Department, who filed these pleadings. Another important thing to know here is that this particular thing that she is asking the Supreme Court about has absolutely nothing to do with anything we're talking about today, and it predates everything we're talking about. Her claim is that the non-prosecution plea agreement that Epstein made, that names 4 or 5 unnamed co-conspirators actually was meant to apply to her, and therefore she was not constitutionally tried. For all people that don't know this, it really is not unusual at all. It sounds like it would be unusual, but for a case to go from whatever she was sentenced to now getting to the Supreme Court is not slow. That's unfortunately that's the process. So the really interesting thing about this, though, is that the government is opposed to the Supreme Court even hearing the case. This was not about deciding anything today. They are asking the Supreme Court to deny what's called a writ of certiorari, which is her lawyers asking the Supreme Court to hear evidence to give her a new trial, and the government doesn't even want that.
That, I guess, is interesting. Let me go to Josiah, because I know you were shaking your head a lot.
Yeah.
Again, though, I mean, I know you're saying, but I just got to go, okay, let's be real. You can just look at MAGA on X. You can look at Truth Social. You can look at Turning Point USA, what happened there with all the speakers. You can look at any conservative news outlet that has been covering this for years and years and years. You know, to say that, we even have people saying flat out, if I can't have a government that can protect children, again, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, I don't care about deportations, because this to them is the top issue. Now, you can argue maybe it's a small minority, but I think, you know, the reason why we continue to have these conversations, and we're going to continue to have it, is because it's being driven by that conservative media that has been so important for Donald Trump in his 2024 election. I don't know if you can just ignore it.
Well, I don't know if you can just ignore it simply, but I think the reality is MAGA has won. It's accomplished real political aims. We got Donald Trump back in office. We've gotten deportation funding through Congress. We are implementing policies that are aligned with Donald Trump's vision. And I understand there's a lot of complaining, right? And I didn't love the Iran strikes, but it's not a wider war, and we're lucky that's not happening, right? I don't love what's happening in Ukraine, but the reality is reformulating the world order is an enormous task, and it's going to take time to do that. I think Donald Trump is a pragmatist. He's trying to figure out how to maneuver his way through all these really complex issues. Having a bunch of influencers get up in arms about this Epstein case doesn't assist that when there are attainable ways of doing the things they ostensibly care about, right? You don't like Israeli influence in our government? There are tons of people who represent the Israeli government. Mark Levin on Fox News is de facto an agent of the Israeli government. If you don't want those kinds of people exerting foreign policy influence, then you can attack them right there. If you don't like politicians being corrupt, then demand that Anthony Fauci get arrested. Jeffrey Epstein is no longer with us. That dude's been dead for 6 freaking years. And there is no evidence I see that Ghislaine Maxwell is going to be brought before Congress is going to tell the truth. She could just make shit up. And that's probably what's going to happen. So I think right now, the influencer class, the MAGA class, the people who are talking about Epstein because of these political reasons, they need to get more serious about policy. That's separate from the things that we're talking about in regards to the actual mechanics of the case, the victims, the things Epstein did, getting justice for those individuals. There's just 2 totally different things going on here. One of which is very political, it's oriented toward policy, and one of which is this actual case. And my focus is on policy. Donald Trump has delivered real wins. He can deliver more. The influencers who have spent a lot of time and interest on this case need to lock in terms of accomplishing real political objectives. That should be the focus.
Josiah,
if I could sit rep, I
real
think
quick,
that,
I promise I'll go right over to you. I just want to comment on what Josiah said, because it's a really important point. Sometimes the things that become your biggest assets can also become your biggest threats. And with respect to MAGA, we have seen how very powerful that influencer base can be. I mean, we obviously saw during the campaign Trump doing a lot of media with podcasters and alternative media. We have seats in the White House now for alternative media. There have been a lot of credibility given to people who form opinions, very strong ones, and have a very big audience to deliver those opinions. And we saw, especially during the primary, in the presidential primary, how powerful influencers can be. But just on that same vein, you're seeing also how destructive those emotions can be. And Josiah's point is a very well taken one. The difference between people who are in the political world who understand that we need to be celebrating the wins and preparing for the 2026 midterm elections so that we can continue to deliver on the promises of the campaign versus the people that might even be new to politics, like we saw with Elon Musk, who just get very upset about one issue, and that one issue causes them to go completely, that is it. They came to Trump on one issue, and they can leave Trump on one issue. And so that is the problem when you're playing with dynamite a little too, and we're seeing that now. I agree with you, though, Josiah. I think we need to be more universal with respect to considering everything that's going on and not just singular issue voters. You have to look at everything else and all the other things we've been able to accomplish in 6 months, the wars that are not starting, the tax breaks that are coming, the immigration that's controlled. I mean, there's other things the influencers should be happy about, but for some reason this Epstein thing is just taking over. And again, I think it's just the way the weapons have been sharpened, and now unfortunately we're falling on our own blades.
And let me jump in real quick on there in terms of campaign promise. Donald Trump didn't spend much time talking about Epstein at all. This is something that Pam Bondi and Dan Bongino and Kash Patel are talking about. That's a different set of individuals. Trump was focused on immigration and trade and foreign war from the beginning. So pitching this on Trump seems bizarre when the messaging failure was initially from his subordinates. Trump is deciding to cover for them for whatever reason. But I don't want that to get lost in here. Like, if you go and look at Donald Trump's public appearances, I just don't see much about Epstein at all during the campaign. This is something that's happened out of left field.
As a Trump supporter, and I'm getting criticism for it online all the time, I have to push back even on that, though. And this is probably the most consistent criticism of Trump from all of his supporters is that, yes, you're right, Pam Bondi is his subordinate. And why does Trump always have to answer for the failures of his subordinates? We saw this in the 2016 term. And if it is, and this is the most consistent thing, is if Pam Bondi did screw up the messaging, why isn't she being held accountable? And I think, I think Trump could have avoided a lot of this if he would have just said, sorry, Pam, that wasn't the right message, and we're going to have to move on, sort of like what happened after the Signalgate controversy. So I do think doubling down on I understand why he's doing it. She's done a good job, and there's other things she's working on that are much bigger than Epstein. But at the same time, sometimes you have to sacrifice somebody for the good of the family. And, I think that is probably the sticky wicket on that one is a lot of people are saying, well, fine, if Pam lied to people or if she didn't understand what she had or she screwed up the messaging, why isn't she paying the price? And all of that combined is creating this symphony of frustration by MAGA. And I think we need to figure out if there's a responsibility, who's responsible for it, and at least give answers to people in order for them to move on. And I really think that is what people are looking for is accountability. And if it's not going to be Epstein's accountability, we want the accountability for why people have been told we'd have accountability if accountability wasn't achievable. But other than that, I agree with what you're saying. But the Pam Bondi thing, you made the point that, it's not his issue, it's hers. Well, why isn't she being held responsible? And then
let me go to Stephen and Dave on this.
I do have a follow-up question for Josiah as well. So before
so let me do this. Let me just have this. Let me have this, and then I'll go to you. I want it because I think Cricket maybe if I maybe I'm going in the direction you're going. Hopefully, and if not,
I'm going influencer.
Okay, because what I'm hearing is. And this kind of ties a little bit in the previous space we had others of emotion and policies, emotion, policies, emotion, policies. What I think people need to understand is, and I'm going to go to Stephen for this. You can have, you ran on all this, right? Here's a key example, right? And I know, Stephen, we had this space with you. Reducing government. And the big, beautiful bill had not really. DOJ, not okay. It's okay. The deportation, the one, and that's why a lot of conservatives that's why we support this because of the deportations. Okay. But regardless, let's make an argument that all this is true, but don't undercut the importance this had in the voters that voted for Donald Trump and a significant portion of it. And I think how we see this is everybody has their own information space. Liberals have it. You can call us the mainstream media. You can call it blue sky. Conservatives have it. True Social, X, OANN, whatever. But for Republicans, this is or maybe rephrase that. For a lot of MAGA voters, this is a major issue. And to them, this is policy. This goes to the heart of our judicial system. This goes to the heart of the two-tier justice system. This goes to the heart of the deep state, of the elite. All of the things that they've been fed for years, they believe wholeheartedly in this, and they put this, and it's almost like getting a liberal, let's say, it's kind of like saying you shouldn't support renewable energies. And it's like, what do you mean? That's a whole component of, during the Biden administration, the Green New Deal, green energy. And to, let's say, have a Democrat run and say, oh, I have a law this, but let's build coal plants. It kind of runs counter to that. And whatever the policy that they might have that had gone through, you lost that voter because of a core issue. And I think, Stephen, that's something that I'm noticing is that, yes, you can talk about emotions and policies, but in this construct and this specific set of voters, to me, it does feel like it's a policy because it goes into our deeper heart of how they view the government. And this case is the embodiment of all that.
Well, I think to your point, Sitrep, there's these different silos of electorate, and the MAGA silo, which there's some Venn diagram between libertarian, conservative, MAGA, MAHA, sphere, and I think the lowest common denominator there is a mistrust in government. And if we look at COVID-19 and the pandemic response that we had in the United States and around the world, the lies, the propaganda, the government coming down, hard on people, locking people down into their homes, forcing them to see their families, et cetera, et cetera. There's so much packed up anger. And of course, you have this Epstein thing that's been brewing for years. And this idea that the government's lying to us, there's these cabals, there's these unelected bureaucrats, and that essentially the government is this duopoly that pretends to fight in front of their constituents, but ultimately agrees behind closed doors. And, if you're a MAGA person and you see someone like a Thomas Massey be persecuted for voting against the big, beautiful bill because he's a true libertarian leading conservative, then your whole illusion of we're a part of this MAGA movement to take back America and make us prosperous again is being shattered. When you see Trump back Thomas Massey's primary opponent, I mean, there has to be something there that wrenches at the gut of somebody who's really of a hardcore constitutionalist, conservative, libertarian that says, you know what, maybe these aren't my people. Maybe this isn't my team. If we're going to go bomb Iran or we're going to give mRNA vaccines to children, then all the rhetoric that's been stacked up in the last, 8 years of Trump running for office and, slowly combating the deep state and everything else, all that goes out the window. And I think it increases this disillusionment in government. And I think there's a real political risk to the GOP now in the midterms coming up, because I think they're going to see a lot of dissatisfied voters that are probably going to go libertarian, NPA, or simply stay home. And I think they better be careful, because this is a pretty big single issue for a lot of folks. And the way that it's being handled, I think, is very reckless.
Can I jump in there? Yeah. I want to go there for a second. These threats that come from these different parts of the coalition, like, oh, you're going to lose us if you don't do X, you don't do Y. This is not how you have a meaningful political movement. And I'm sorry, as much as I agree with much of what the libertarians like, I'm anti-COVID lockdown. I'm anti-mRNA vaccine. I'm anti-foreign influence in government. I'm anti-intervention. I'm all of these things. But how do you accomplish your goals? You have to have a coherent strategy. You need to work together. And then you have these different groups that want to split off and make some principle higher than winning. I'm sorry, but the left is the enemy. They are outright devoted to destroying this country, destroying our heritage. Splitting off votes to do nonsense and then end up losing is a mistake. Donald Trump has delivered real, credible gains. We are not at war in the Middle East right now. That's a good thing, right? And Biden was insane. That guy wasn't even president. We can't have them back. So pro-lifers, sometimes Second Amendment people, libertarians, look, stop grandstanding and stay on message. Stay focused on delivering results. The best way to accomplish what you want is to stick with Trump in the long run.
Cricket.
I mean, I can see you're getting emotional, Josiah, so I think we should bring it back. Because,
and then I'll go to Dave. Sorry, go ahead, Cricket.
I mean, obviously, Josiah is getting a little emotional here when he's talking about this idea that half the country is un-American. I don't think you can love this country and hate half of it. I don't think you can hate whole states. I don't think you can hate all of our cities. You have to love this country and the people in it and work to make it better. And there are plenty of liberals and Democratic voters who absolutely love this country.
I haven't seen
I couldn't let that one go. But my question initially to Josiah was, you mentioned this idea of an influencer grift and the fact that you think that there are people keeping this Epstein story in the media because of some sort of clout or internet gain. How do you respond to people like Charlie Kirk, who said outright that he was contacted by the Trump administration to not talk about this anymore? When you have someone there trying to control that narrative and actually taking money in order to not talk about it, how is that not a problem?
Well, I can just say two things real quick. I love America and I hate her enemies. And we have a lot of enemies in this country who want to destroy my way of life. And I'm not okay with that. And we're shattering our sense of national cohesion and identity. And I find that to be a huge problem. And the Democratic Party is simply behind that. So I love this country. I want to preserve it. And that's why I'm opposed to the left and what they're doing. As to your second point, what I mean by influencers is I'm talking about people who've built an audience around pitching a story or an idea, like I'm a truth teller and everyone else is a liar. These are people who are not fundamentally oriented toward accomplishing political aims. Their goal is to be online, to have an audience, to get subscribers, to sell advertising. And sometimes that model is inimical toward accomplishing real change, because actually it's better for those people when they're losing. It's in those moments where people turn to them for support. When Democrats come into office, the National Rifle Association receives way more funding. That's just the reality of how some of these models works. You get perverse incentives. And I'm not saying that everyone who cares about the story is bad or they're not paying attention. I'm saying there's an incentive structure here for people to make a story out of something where there are real concrete things that can be accomplished, but they're not really interested in that. What they're interested in is boosting their own, aggrandizing themselves in the public sphere.
Oh, wait, can I ask you something just quickly? When you got somebody like Steve Bannon, who kind of crosses that barrier between influencer and someone who's been in the administration, and he's out there saying that you're going to lose 30 to 40 seats if he doesn't address this. Yet at the same time, you have the paradox, and I get things wrong, folks. I've been talking about Bannon sitting on 8 hours of Epstein interviews, went back, did research. Supposedly it's 15 hours of interviews with Epstein. Why isn't he releasing that? Isn't that a bit of a grift? I'm not playing team baseball here, everybody. For instance, you talked about how Trump stayed away from the messaging on Epstein. You're right, but he always leaned into Epstein. When he was running in 2015, he made it about the Clintons. When he was even asked about QAnon, he said he didn't know what was going on, but they sure like him. Do you think he had no idea what the QAnon phenomenon was? Do you think people like Bongino and Kash Patel that talked about Epstein literally hundreds of times over the last 3 to 4 years on podcasts didn't know that their constituents expected this? Listen, I was on the Reawaken America tour by chance. I think I did about 10 of them. Not a Christian conservative. I didn't talk about Epstein or right or left issues. I went there for transhumanism and really to critique Musk on real issues like his defense contracting and military industrial complex ties. I will tell you right now, a quarter to half of those people were in total fantasy land telling me stories about how John McCain was tried at Guantanamo Bay for crimes against humanity. I mean, they don't live in reality. They really thought superheroes were coming. So I understand when the messaging isn't there, but at the same time, a guy like me that now voted for Trump 3 times because he was the best choice 3 times, he came in there and said he was going to stop this conflict in the Middle East. You say that we're not war in the Middle East? We're help running what's going on in Israel and Palestine. That's imagination land, bro. Yemen is still going on. I don't even know where people come from when they don't understand these things. And then on top of that, you look at how he said he was going to stop the war day one, actually beforehand, in Russia, Ukraine. It is a kick in the balls of people like myself that he just gave them $400 million more in Patriot missiles. And let me end on this. At the very top, it is a uniparty. And let me give an example. For somebody like myself, who's been talking about Julian Assange for years, that guy was released under the Biden administration. No one said a word. Trump didn't say anything. The Democrats didn't say anything. It didn't come up in the debates. I mean, think to yourself, there are still third rails out there that these people who are politicians who constantly, on both sides, overpromise and underdeliver, refuse to address. I'll leave it there.
Yeah, and if I could jump in very quickly. For one, there's a generational divide that's going on here, which we need to be aware of. Donald Trump is almost 80 years old. He might actually, his birthday, I think, it just happened. He's 80. He watches television. He's not online. He's not reading Twitter. He's not listening to podcasts. He's in a different media environment than the rest of us. And though he uses those social media platforms, it's monodirectional. That's how he communicates out there. So some of these things, I don't know how much he's tracking on, how important this was to elements of the base. That aside, as to Trump's actual policies, look, Trump is bringing in people, I know, he's bringing people into his administration like Tulsi Gabbard and many others who are very skeptical of foreign intervention. Trump also wants to bring peace to places like Russia and Ukraine and wants to put pressure on Putin and others. Is it going to work? I have no idea. What I'm saying is there's a lot of complexity here, and to be political, to have a movement, you can't just get scope locked on singular issues like Trump's giving all this money here. Well, you have to look at the totality of the situation and you have to make that case.
Brother, I
think
gave you 4 issues in 2 minutes. I gave you 4 issues, and I could have given you 24 more. I'm not a singular issue guy. All of those issues, whether it be war, arms dealing, accountability, these are, again, multi-administration and multi-generational. It's not just, I'm not a millennial. You know, I get offended. I'm almost 50. I'm 46, man. I mean, I haven't been happy. And again, it's a low bar. Trump has been the best president of my lifetime. Yes, because of some of the policy. I liked when he got us out of the Paris Accords, the WHO. But you got to keep running this train. He came in hot, telling everybody it was going to be small government. And then he attacks a guy like Massey. I wanted Massey in the administration. I want Mike Lee in the administration. I want Rand Paul in the administration. I want people that are actually trying to get accountability. Listen, Tulsi Gabbard's great. I like RFK Jr. We need results, okay? That's the bottom line. I don't care who it is, what side it is. I'm not on any side. I'm Team America, Team Constitutional Republic, Team Accountability.
Right.
We need
so
to work that.
Look, I do kind of want to just because I do want to bring it back a little bit to more of this because I hear everything you say, Jason. Like I'm the same Team America and all that. I just have a fundamental different view on foreign policy, domestic policy. But just again, I think it's kind of what Crick is saying is just fundamental disagreements and then overall. But Dave, to you, because I was kind of alluding to this, and again, it goes back to policy and emotions. And then Jason, I think we know. I think we've all seen those crowds. Obviously, like when you're saying John McCain is starting Guantanamo, I was like, okay, all right. But Dave, I think one of the things that I think I find interesting in this, right, and I think that is kind of was really propelled in the Trump administration, right, both in this first and now here and then in between during the Biden administration, was that, again, it goes back to this Jeffrey Epstein is the embodiment of this deep distrust in government, which hasn't historically had a lot of influence within U.S. government as a policy, as a movement within the political spectrum, right? I mean, let's look before Donald Trump. Who did we have? Mitt Romney, Obama, the Bushes, Cheney, Clintons, right? Like we would say, traditional conservatives, traditional Democrats. You had your liberals, and then with Trump, there was this new political idea that really not new. It was there, but came to the forefront of American politics, right? And I think you can talk about policies, but it becomes a little bit difficult because what I'm hearing from Jason is I had to stomach the bombing of Iran. I had to stomach more government spending and rising deficit with the big, beautiful bill. Obviously we're moving, the deportation side. Trump made a comment, then walked it back about maybe giving amnesty to, farmers and hospitality workers. Then he walked it back. But what I'm hearing, though, and I think this is what's happening, is like this idea that they have to stomach this. What I would say, I don't know, again, I'm just going to share this. Benny Johnson, who is a very influential conservative, right, just tweeted out that he had a conversation with somebody close to the administration. And what he's saying is there might actually be more, following what Lara Trump said, he had a conversation. And what it looks like is they're going to release more files and even possibly appoint a special prosecutor because of the pushback they received from Turning Point USA. So clearly, what this is telling me is that the administration over the weekend tried to bury this under the rug. And the reason why they can't is not because of the Democrats. It's the base. And the base will not swallow this pill and they will demand change. So I'll go to Dave and then Brian, I'll go to you and then we'll bring in Nate.
A lot of it is it. Jason mentioned Steve Bannon. You're also seeing this from Tucker Carlson. These are some of the biggest voices in that movement questioning this. And yeah, it's not just about Epstein and the transparency conversation, but it's also the peripheral issues that they wrapped into this on the campaign trail, including, talking about the exploitation of women, like males competing in women's sports. The Republicans were on the side against exploited women, and Epstein was part of that. So this was a big issue. And I think the comment that a lot of people are ignoring that is more revelationary than the turn face by Bondi is when Alina Habba talked about that, how we would be shocked to see the names that they would produce here. This was a big part of the campaign. We're seeing stunning continuity here. And yeah, we're still at war in the Middle East. The Yemen blockade, a third of Syria is still occupied. We're fighting ISIS ostensibly there on the side of the Iranians against the Sunni regime, but now we can't negotiate with them on Iran. All this stuff is kind of wrapped up in the duplicity that we've seen from this administration. And to talk about, standing on principle over issues like, Josiah was making kind of a pragmatist argument, I feel like, I think fairly so in some regard, that, to take some of the losses, you have to take the successes you're given. But no, you can compartmentalize issue by issue, single issue coalitions, nullifying the bad crap and just completely pouring the other libertarian. So you don't have to be tribe red or tribe blue. We can be against all forms of perversion. The last thing I want to say is there's no chance that Americans will just swallow another Warren Commission or 9/11 Commission, like opposing Alan Dulles, who JFK dismissed, to head that. Who's going to head an Epstein Commission? Pompeo or Comey or Clapper? It's freaking ridiculous. That will not fly.
Hey, can we
there's already a committee in Congress that the Republicans set up to investigate this. Marjorie Taylor Greene is on it, I think. Let me make a couple points. I try really hard to stay away from politics these days for lots of good reasons, but I do have to make a few comments. Okay, first of all, since I haven't been on screen with you guys before, I assume it's a rule that just because we're on screen when someone says something we completely disagree with, we don't agree with it, right? Okay, so just want that on the record. Second thing is, the Justice Department is the largest law firm in the world, okay? They have tens of thousands of lawyers. The government of the United States can walk and chew gum at the same time. We could have the Justice Department trying to get justice for all these victims and also pursue all the other objectives that you guys want the president to pursue. Second thing is, every president, including all three that I work for, since Harry Truman, 100 years ago, almost 80 years ago, has said the buck stops here. This is the first time I've ever seen such a systematic effort to claim the president has nothing to do with the government that he runs. He could pick up the phone today and he could say, Pam and Cash, bring me every document that exists on Epstein. He could have them all reviewed. He could have them all released. And it's no coincidence that when Pam Bondi wanted to answer a question in the cabinet room about Epstein, the president shushed her. Last thing I'll say, two more things. One, it is just a fact now that other material exists. You got the redacted documents. You have these influencers being told by the White House that they're reconsidering releasing documents, which means there are documents. So I think we can get rid of that trope here. Last thing is, and this is the closest I'm going to get to politics, I hope. We heard a huge outcry, and I'm a privacy and civil liberties lawyer, so some of this was justified in the last administration and even during Trump 1, that the government was censoring people because they were sending out declassified intelligence warnings about foreign efforts to influence the United States. I'm not saying whether that was right or wrong, that conclusion, but if that was wrong, it's certainly wrong for the commander-in-chief of the United States to pick up the phone and tell a self-proclaimed journalist like Charlie Kirk to stop talking about a story. At least we can be consistent.
I think one other thing we can acknowledge, at least in all of this, that for the accusation that MAGA is a cult, it's clear that they are not. So let's move on. I think we wanted to bring in
silver lining.
Yeah, silver lining. I think we wanted to bring Nate into the conversation. Welcome to the stage, and you haven't had a voice to say in this yet. What is your take now, Nate? I'm assuming because your handle is Nate the Lawyer, you're a lawyer. There's been a lot of discussion before you got here. Is people want things. They want evidence. They want people to be arrested. They want accountability. Some of the back and forth we had before is I was suggesting that, look, they said they don't have anything else. This is all they have. And there have been a couple of trials, and the fact that nobody else has been arrested means there may not be enough evidence. And there's been redacted things released, and people said, somebody suggested that They can unredact it. That's releasing new info. But then there's legal challenges with unredacting things that might have been redacted for legal purposes, so nobody's implicated that didn't deserve to be, et cetera, et cetera. Nate, what is your take on everything? Let's get you up to speed on the panel, and then we'll continue our conversation.
All right. So first, I want to take this just from the legal perspective in terms of prosecuting unindicted co-conspirators, people who we believe may be on this list who may have done these things with children. There's a statute of limitations that may come into play with this. Now, the statute of limitations was changed in 2003 to remove it from things like child porn and other child sex acts. And then there was a more broader removal of the statute of limitations in 2006, which is known as the John Walsh Act. So a lot of the crimes that occurred allegedly with Jeffrey Epstein occurred between 2000 and we're talking about 2005. So some of those co-conspirators who may have committed some crimes with these children may be subject to the statute.
I think we just lost.
Yeah, we lost him on there. All right, let's get back into the conversation. Now, Brian, I'll ask you. You're a lawyer. Is there a statute of limitations issue? Can you pick up where he was saying?
Well, I haven't researched this today, so I don't want to be too absolute about it.
That is the perfect lawyer answer, but yes.
But there have been statutory changes that extend the statute of limitations. Also, in every statute of limitations, there's what's called a discovery rule. So if you don't know about a certain thing at a certain time, that can toll the statute of limitations. But he's right. There might be some perpetrators who just wouldn't be prosecutable now for various reasons. Doesn't mean they couldn't still be subjected to accountability, though, including suits if the information goes out there.
Yeah, yes, no, definitely. So I'm thinking on one end, the statute of limitations problem, if you're a prosecutor, because I was a prosecutor in the Bronx, New York, which was hell. I'm just going to tell you guys, it was hell.
That is true.
Yeah, and it's the worst county in New York. But when you're a prosecutor, you have to think about something like that. And then if I can't charge you legitimately with the crime because the statute of limitations run out, I shouldn't accuse you because that's unfair to you. You can't defend yourself because it's like, I believe you did it, statute of limitations, and that simply accuses you without any type of recourse. So So when it comes to statute of limitations, that may be an issue. Now, I think when it comes to just knowing the names, because that's what we're talking about, right? Knowing who else was involved. I think you do have the foreign entity piece of it because let's just be honest, the prime minister of Israel going to the island 12 times to meet with Epstein, we can pretend that has nothing to do with it. But if you say it has something to do with it, you're an anti-Semite. I'm not an anti-Semite. But it's very weird that the prime minister of Israel traveled to the island so many times. And we have pictures of Bill Clinton getting massages from people of the Epstein. And, and we have now Epstein's own attorney who represented both Donald Trump and Jeffrey Epstein out there saying, there is a list. I know there's a list. I know whose names are on the list, but I can't say anything about the list. So I think the issue isn't, and this may be a radical opinion, but I don't think the issue is the list per se. I think it's the lead up to the list. I think it's Trump, who was president when Jeffrey Epstein was arrested and when Jeffrey Epstein died. He was privy to all of that information. What happened in the jail cell, what happened here, what happened there. And then when he lost the election, or if the election was stolen, whichever view you want to take, for those 4 years that he was running for president, it's not like he said there's nothing there. He was telling people, hey, I'm going to release it. There's craziness. He started making fun of these people. And if anyone knew what were in those files, the president of the United States, who was there at that time he was arrested, would absolutely know. And then he runs. We all believe him. He gets back in office. And on top of that, he goes and hires people who were saying the same thing. Jeffrey Epstein didn't commit suicide. This. There's a list, right? He hired all those people. He hired Pam Bondi. She's up. The list is on my desk. So I personally was absolutely convinced the guy who was in office that know the stuff was there, that he hired all these people to put the stuff out. And then when they started saying there's nothing here, I was skeptical. And then the thing that flipped me, because I will say straight up, I supported Trump, and I still think even today with Epstein, President Trump is better than President Harris. If you disagree with that, then I'm sorry, you just don't live in reality. President Trump today is still better than President Harris. Anybody else is saying that, I think is just a lunatic. But President Trump lost me with that statement, because that statement that he put out over the weekend blamed Obama Clinton and all these other people for the list, and all these and at that point, I knew he was trying to cover. Now I don't know if he's covering for himself. I don't know if he's covering somebody else, but that didn't ring true. And then he had the nerve to say, well, let's not look into this old stuff, but then talk about we're investigating a 2020 election. Well, guess what happened back during the 2020 election? Epstein had killed himself back then. So I think the only way he can actually make this right is he should do it like they buried the 9/11 stuff. You do it like they buried the JFK stuff. And you know how they did it? You have this committee, the special prosecutor, they look at the stuff for 5 or 6 years, and then 10 years down the line, they say, hey, we got nothing. I think Trump just miscalculated the base. He miscalculated that people would actually believe him and would actually take what he was saying as truth. And we did. And this was the point where we were like, hold on, we believed you. And it seems like you're lying to us because all the evidence says you're lying to us. Now, I think the way you clean it up is exactly what they're proposing doing. Special prosecutors, just bury it in the process. That's the way you bury it. But you don't just tell us that we are all dummies and don't understand what's going on, because we do. We do. Everybody in this room is hyper intelligent, and we all know when when this is BS. And if anybody here, this is not BS, I'm sorry. I just, I think you're being unreasonable.
I mean, I think one thing I would throw out there is that, politicians say a bunch of stuff, and Trump, more than others, will just, it's a beautiful list. It has all of my enemies on there. It's going to be amazing. And then you get it and you're thinking, oh, you know what I mean? I never put that much stock in this case. I mean, the striking thing to me is I'm of course able to believe that there are foreign infiltrators in our government. I'm able to believe that powerful people do all kinds of bad stuff. I see it every single day. So to me, the hard part is to say, well, go after that stuff. I mean, that's how you get the legitimacy back. And that's separate from this particular case, but I think it's just the overarching problem. Like,
But
why
Joshua,
are people so invested in
But
this?
Joshua,
Listen, first of all, he never said beautiful list, but what he did just say is all the documents are Democrat documents. That's imagination land, bro. Like,
Yes.
again, the vast majority of the public documents that we now have are documents that were filed in lawsuits in civil court from the victims. And much of that has still been kept from the public. We do have the 2008 case. But again, just like the CIA lawyer was talking about, that's a non-prosecution deal where literally 4 or 5 other people, Sarah Palin, maybe, Leslie Groff, maybe. I mean, names that we know from other reports were protected in. And then when you look at that, and let's just show people really quickly. I mean, you're talking about people like Jess Staley, that after Epstein was convicted, hanging out in the hot tub with him, and later on is part of what? The outcry that they were joking about him with young girls in Disney dresses, and then they paid the $290 million, but they only pay it if they can be protected. How do they protect themselves? Mrs. George's office has also reached out to some of Mr. Epstein's former employees in the Virgin Islands. She said her office was trying to navigate around non-disclosure agreements that Mr. Epstein had signed with many of his team. She said that the estate should commit to releasing the employees from those agreements, which they did not. And then just the existence of the NDAs casts a shadow of a doubt. They did that with the victims. Again, some of the victims didn't even get in on the compensation fund. In fact, I wish Nick Bryant had stuck it out. He talks about 2 very credible victims that could discuss what it looked like inside of Epstein's home, and they weren't 14. They claimed to be 10. Now, again, I stick to what I can prove, but to say that there's not documentation, that this stuff does not exist, here's the deal. If they wanted to be honest about this, they could have kept things secret and then gone prosecution style and actually gone after maybe a few others, and that maybe would have satiated people. With no other prosecutions, right now there's a reason Ghislaine Maxwell says she's going to talk behind the scenes, because she can. She kept her mouth shut because she thought she was maybe going to get off on appeal, and she knew what she was charged with. Even if she didn't get off on appeal, she would eventually be released. So right now, if we do get a 9/11 commission style, that's bogus. In fact, one of the things that Trump has played into, that we were lied to about 9/11, which we were. You want to talk about a corrupt FBI. I mean, I've been reporting for years. I mean, they talk about that al-Bayoumi case with the CIA. We've known since 2002 that these guys lived with and rented from an FBI informant. We know that there were reports prior to 9/11 that Flight 11, in particular by James Wood, this is also reported by Seymour Hersh, they had 4 of the hijackers, nothing done. Waleed al-Shehri had the CIA called on him by his neighbor, Deborah Albritton, nothing. A bunch of these people trained at U.S. bases. Brian's laughing. Everything I said is factual.
Okay, I think I know why Brian is laughing. Is because, I'm sorry, Seymour Hersh, like, I got it, but like.
Well, when Hersh lost in court?
So
lost in court?
Okay, let's be real, how the U.S. justice systems work with defamation and stuff like that compared to other countries, and here it's a lot. But I like, what I would say is, and I think this goes to kind of the problem. And Brian, I'll let you answer anything you want to, but I think this is the issue. I personally believe, even if there's more lists, like more information, right? I'm not convinced that it's enough maybe for prosecution. Again, I'm not a lawyer. I think that's a problem that is happening, right?
Well, can I jump in here? Because I was a prosecutor. And
let me just finish my point with your date. Let me finish my point here just very quickly. And I think that this is the problem that I think Donald Trump is running into. Because again, there's 2 options. It's either a cover-up or people were played to. And they leverage this for political support and votes. The problem is, I don't think there's never going to be enough evidence presented to show, there's nothing else there. There's nothing else. So the segment that was played to is never going to accept that answer, even though that's the truth. And the outrage is never going to be, I was played, you touched my emotions and my feelings about Jeffrey Epstein and all this and the conspiracies and blah, blah, blah. It's always going to fall back to, you're covering up. It's like the JFK. No matter how many times, like, here's everything, literally everything. Here's all the information. What exactly? Like, it's never enough. And I think that's the thing about the American political system, is that you might run into an issue where somebody else tries to get into power and say, I can give you more. And it's just because it's playing into people's emotions for political reasonings, rather than to just be brutally honest and say, guys, sorry, there's nothing here. But you created that.
But Stefano, let me just ask you something, because you just said, I kind of get the feeling when you say there's nothing else left or there's nothing else here for JFK, for example, right? You're just taking the authoritative source of the day's word. Let me give you an example on what I'm waiting for JFK. Warren C. DeBrew, who was the FBI station chief in New Orleans, who followed Oswald to Texas, okay? In one of those FBI, he wasn't his obituary. They basically give a small run of the things that they've done. And one of the things DeBrew did was the initial 800-page report on the scene for the FBI on JFK. It's on the record. That's an authoritative source. Did we get that? They told us, they gave us everything. That's my point. You're taking.
Right. What I'm saying is, here's a perfect example. I understand what you're getting at, but this is what I get at, for example, and I know Brian might understand this. Brian has much more experience than I do in the intelligence world. I did military intelligence. I have a separate, but not as long as Brian, and definitely not in the position he was at. But here's a perfect example where there were JFK files that were released, right, that were declassified, and people were focusing on the text. I don't remember, because I remember this was something in the Mario thing. It's like something insane. It was an incredible, but like everybody was focusing, and then nobody was focusing on the top, which basically said, this comes from a first-time unverified source. And as Brian can attest to, how many times in the intel world you get information and it's unverifiable or the source is unreliable, and you just, if you don't understand, it's like legal lingo, right? There's legal terms that lawyers understand fluently and perfectly, but for the rest of us, we're like, we have no idea what the hell this means. It's very similar in the intelligence side of the house, where there's lingo that is said, but you're missing the important context of, is this a reliable source? What's the source rating? What is it saying? And I think that's the thing. Now, in the law enforcement side, in the investigation side, I can't talk to you about it. I've never been a prosecutor. I've never been an investigator. I've never done any investigation of that. So I can't attest to that specifically. But you're proving my point, though, Jason. You're proving exactly what I'm arguing, which isn't, is there a cover up or people were played to? It's regardless of what the answer is, there is this, and I think this is something that Josiah is trying to get at, right? Or David even. It's no matter what you give, it's never going to be enough. But the question then becomes, who's at fault for that?
Yes.
And I think the problem is maybe not Donald Trump, because I would agree with you. Donald Trump didn't run Epstein as much as others because, again, he was the president. But you can't tell that about Bondi. You can't say that about Kash Patel. And you sure as hell can't say that Don Bongino. They were going at it. You brought them into the administration. You put them. This is your court. This is your responsibility. So either all three have to go, but even if all three of them go, you're never going to satisfy the crowd of people that you created by saying there is this grand conspiracy. Because again, the Jeffrey Epstein conspiracy did not come, unlike Russiagate or the Russia scandal, whatever, which came from the Democrats or John McCain or the establishment, how Republicans want to say it. This came internal to the MAGA movement. This was a MAGA movement. That was what was created. You have to deal with it. And I think the problem is the Trump administration doesn't know how to deal with it. And whatever they do, it's never going to be enough.
Well,
can I make a point?
I think
we'll go to others. Go ahead, Nate.
Yeah, I just want to make a point about the evidence for criminal prosecutions. Just real quick, if we just go with what we've heard over the years, we have Ghislaine Maxwell, who was there, right? She can obviously testify about what she did. She was the madam, for instance, right? She knows. We got the plane logs. We have, what did Pam Bondi said, hours and hours and hours of video of children having intimate relations with other people. Who's on those tapes, right? Who is there? And also we have something pretty shocking. We have the 200 plus live victims who were alive at that time, who can also tell us. We have the court records. We have the depositions. We have all of this beautiful evidence to tell us who was doing these things with children, enough for at least an indictment or at least a real inquiry into the situation. Now, if you're telling me videotapes, witnesses, and live witnesses saying you did is not enough to get a conviction, I think it's enough to at least go to trial, right? Because the standard to go to trial is so
Nate,
low.
let me ask you this as a lawyer. So here's the thing. I mean, we've had 2 trials, right? There has been evidence that's in there with 300 gigabytes, according to the memo that went out that started all of this a couple of weeks ago at this point. There is evidence. There is testimony. There are quote-unquote victims. So it's not like this doesn't exist. So how come then nobody else has been named or prosecuted? As a lawyer, I mean, what would you think the reason is? Is it a cover-up, or is it the fact that there's not enough evidence? There's civil lawsuits, by the way. There have been civil lawsuits which has a lower burden of proof. So if the evidence is there and there's civil lawsuits with separate people, why not the criminal ones?
Well, I would say this. If you tell me you have video of men and children having relations on U.S. soil, that seems like enough evidence to me to put that person in the room doing that particular thing.
So the odds are it doesn't exist then, right?
She says, unless they don't exist, but then she tells us it exists. So the odds are either they don't exist, or don't forget, prosecutors also have, so there are some witnesses, like even in the Diddy trial, like for instance, I always like to say this, Cassie Ventura was an unindicted co-conspirator. She admitted to paying prostitutes and travel and bringing people over and even sometimes even some trafficking. She even admitted to some light trafficking, but she was an unindicted co-conspirator because they really wanted to get Diddy. Now I'm thinking there could be some CIA or some motive in saying it's just not worth it for us prosecuting these people at this time because they're still helpful to the government overall. And by exposing anyone on the list, we could destroy what we have built. It's essentially moving up the chain or still trying to keep sources and methods quiet. So again, I don't know what their issues are, but I assume the American people are smart enough that if the evidence and the victims are alive, then
I think one of the things, because I hear this a lot, and I know there are cases of, like, especially like intelligence reporting cannot be used in criminal cases, right? So that's why a lot of times they're two separate
Yes, of course.
aspects of that. I wish Brian was still here and he can kind of go in. So, but what I would say, for example, but I think what you're kind of going up the ladder, like, I mean, here's a clear example recently during the Trump administration, right? And I think this is just standard practice in any, right? One of El Chapo's sons, the famous El Chapo, his son is in U.S. prison. He entered into a plea deal with the U.S. government. They even brought 17 members. El Chapo's family were granted asylum in the United States as part of this plea deal during the Trump administration, right? And Ovidio Guzman specifically, they were brought in, and Ovidio Guzman entered into a guilty deal, likely to target either a more senior Sinaloa cartel member that is in current U.S. prison, or for future prosecutions against corrupt Mexican officials. So I think a lot of times the answer is more clear, which is, as you alluded to, going up, and our best way of getting there is to enter into plea deals, or maybe on, immunity agreements. We see that all the time. And I think that's what's going on. But, Stephen, I'll go to you and then Dave. Again, it goes back to, let me ask you this, Stephen. And then I'm going to ask this also to Dave. What would be enough? What would be enough to satisfy what you think is left? Because let's say there's no videos. Is there any, if that's the case, is that then mean I don't believe the government? And how can they prove to you there's no videos? And if you believe it, then is the argument Pam Bondi's got to go because she lied to all of us in our face.
Well, I think one of the things you have to think about is the all-time low in trust of government. After 9/11, the government said that the air was safe to breathe in New York. And we found out decades later that it was not. So that doesn't mean that holograms flew into the World Trade Centers, but it certainly begs the question, what else we don't know about the events that transpired. Even leading up to the 28 redacted pages of the 9/11 Commission report that were released a few years ago.
That was actually the initial congressional investigation. I just got to correct you. So those 28 pages, and they were eventually released, but not the 9/11 Commission report.
Right. Gotcha. So, if you look back to the decades, the many lies in regards to a lot of things the government's told us, I think that people want some kind of assurance that, this is it. There's nobody else in on it. I don't know what it's going to take, but I think the flip-flopping in the Trump administration certainly makes people understandably uncomfortable, especially since COVID, especially, just in the 20th century alone. How many years did it take for us to find out about Operation Northwoods? The government almost hijacked was it a Cuban or American airliner or blew up a boat in the port of Miami and blamed it on the Cubans as a false flag operation to go to war in Cuba. So, these things happen. The government at one point, Operation Mockingbird, went in and during, I believe it was the early 20th century, was in control of the media. They actually infiltrated as editors in the media. That's a real thing. So what else don't we know? What else are we going to find out 20, 30, 40 years from now? So it begs the question. I think people like Jason, who, may be proven right tomorrow or a decade from now, as more and more eventually trickles out, as more lawsuits, as more victims come out, as perhaps future administrations or future movements to find out more about what happened on Epstein's Island. But I'll never forget when I was down in St. John passing Epstein's Island, and I asked one of the locals what goes on there, and he says, evil things happen there. And they had some choice stories for me. The locals knew. This is an open secret. So we don't know. I don't know what it's going to take to satisfy the American people, but I think some modicum of sincerity from the administration would probably go a long way, but they just have not been sincere. And, to turn around and say, don't even think about it. Why are you talking about this? It just seems to me like gaslighting the MAGA base and the American people and people like myself who want to see justice and want to see something come out of this. But it's not clear to me that they're interested in addressing it. So I don't think it's going to go away.
Well, look, I'll say this: there's news cycles have a tendency to change very rapidly, and I know this is an issue now. MAGA base, if we're going to basically put this all on them, if the MAGA base, if we think they're concerned about Epstein, they're equally concerned about COVID. They're equally concerned about January 6th. They're equally concerned about the 2020 election. And there's a litany of things that could definitely come out. Pam Bondi could announce something tomorrow, and all of a sudden people will forget about this. I certainly think maybe it's just slow news. I don't know. But we've had a lot of valid points. I mean, look,
David,
this
can I
is
just
like,
make one last point about
I was-
documentation, just really quickly?
Yeah,
Just
go ahead.
really.
Yeah.
Edward Snowden, probably his biggest revelation. It was not that we were being spied on by our own government. That actually came out via Hepting versus AT&T, where Norris Insight systems were put into all of our telecommunication office, and essentially every communication went to the NSA. It was thrown out of court twice. The thing that was very important that Edward Snowden talked about is that he had went to a document that was classified, and sometimes we were talking about redactions here, right? He would have something redaction. He talked, and I believe he said this on Rogan, so anyone can go check it out, that he saw a document that was totally fake, that they had planned in case they had to release something. So now we're not talking about redactions. We're talking about a government at the highest levels with one of the biggest whistleblowers that has covered their tracks in some regards so much that they are going to be willing to release, and probably have released, fake documentation, David. That's really, I think, an important thing to say.
I want to answer Sitrep's question about what would satisfy people that are skeptical on this, cynical on this, the American people questioning this. I can speak for myself, not all dissidents, but for me, it's complete releases of all documentation within the deep state about conversations that Epstein had with intelligence assets, not only in the US, but foreign ones, complete interviews with Leslie Wexner, who no one pretends even exists anymore and is just hiding in a cave somewhere over this. Complete interviews with Ehud Barak, all completely transcribed and released unedited. And let's dispose of this notion that nothing else exists or no videos exist, because even mainstream media reported that in his house contained a safe with discs that said young X plus Y. We know that exists, and they're covering it up. Also, Epstein told a New York Times reporter, and this was revealed just days after his death, his suicide, right? The New York Times reporter said, off the record, Epstein said he had compromising information on these prominent people and what their sexual proclivities were and what their illicit drug use was. And also, by the way, an itemized list of all the videos Pam Bondi referred to. We never asked for that to be released, by the way. We don't want child porn released, but we do want people to take a look at that, itemize a list of who the culprits were involved in those crimes, and show that to the American people so that we can tell for ourselves whether there were no connections to Epstein there. So that's just kind of an amalgam of what I think regarding that.
But to your point, I mean, this is the important part. And look, and I think we're going to have to wrap, but we're going to be talking about this more this week as more information comes. Here's the thing, though. People want justice, right? And there's a couple of lawyers here, and I think of the lawyers at least will agree with me that just because people want justice, we don't destroy justice in pursuit of it. And by that being like, well, we want answers, we want people to go to jail, so let's just go and release names and put people on. And we can't do that, because when you start going and trying to find ways to hold people accountable, you're losing your objectivity, and we really don't want to use the justice system in that way. Regardless if you're Democrat, Republican, nobody feels good when we're like, well, I know we should be responsible, but this case is heinous, and we should really go out of our way to make sure the public is happy with the outcome of the case. So on that point, but the other thing is, I mean, look, and this is where we're at, is we have to kind of see how this progresses. If there is enough public outcry, the government does belong to the people. And if the people don't trust the government, or people disappointed in the government, there are elections. Elections do have consequences. But you know what? A lot of things happen before elections too. And we have Congress. Congress is there. I've seen there's reports, I don't know how accurate the reports are, that they're seriously considering the special investigator. Maybe things will change, and maybe we'll come out of this. Maybe we'll get more information as time goes on, and maybe that was the point of the Lara Trump interview today on Benny. I don't know, Stefano Sitrep, I'll send it back over to you. What are your final thoughts on all this?
No, what I would say is, I kind of played along all sides and everything on this, and I know sometimes I get to attack, but as I say, I'm always more open for debate. What I think the problem here for the Trump administration, because if they release more files, maybe the special prosecutor is a way to bury this further. But if they start releasing more, then I think it gives ammunition to the people who've been critical to of Trump, saying, you lied to us again. You said there's not. There's political pressure with your base, and now you give us more. And again, and it continues. You see, it just continues and continues and continues. And I think the problem that the Trump I don't know. Again, this is not a case that I track intimately as much as, let's say, Jason or others and all the Brian and all that. I just hear more for the debate. But what I think the underlying issue for the Trump administration is, you created this. And not only, maybe not necessarily President Trump, Dan Bongino, Kash Patel, A.G. Bondi. Without a doubt.
You're moving out Roger Stone. He's helped this along too, and he's just made some commentary on Maxwell. I mean, he was a big part of that too.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. And so you created an image of distrust of the Biden government, the Biden administration. President Trump ran on this deep state, the swamp, and all this. And I think in a way, Epstein embodied this image, maybe outside of the government, but of this elite, especially unelected elite. And I think this case is it because it had all the symbols of just horrendous crimes. And they ran on it. And now, for whatever reason, because there isn't, or there is and they don't want to release it, they have made the situation worse. And they have created a crisis within their own political movement that is opening others to criticize it. And I think the problem is, this is causing a lot of people who would believe Donald Trump to lose confidence in him. And I think they need to address this quickly. But the problem they're going to run into is, if they start releasing more information, why wouldn't people say, you lied to us again? And I think this is where this political, look, outside of the overarching, criminal investigation, civil lawsuits, etc., from that angle, I think that is going to be a fundamental problem from the Trump administration, because if they start to release more, there's always going to be that underlying question. I would even ask myself, wait a minute, if you said there was none and now you released more, you got to be, at that point, I'm like, okay, you're hiding something. There's got to always be more. Either stick to it and say, if there's nothing more, this is it. I'm sorry, guys, we apologize. We promised you the earth and the moon and all this, and we lied. We don't have it. We entered government. We didn't know. We thought Biden was lying. Sorry, this is all we got. If they release more information, to me at that point, I'm jumping into the thought process like, you're hiding a lot more. And you're trying to give crumbs to satisfy a voter bloc or the American people that at this point, I don't think will ever be satisfied. And now the conversations will be, why isn't President Trump releasing the entire thing? And is it because there's something on him in these files? I don't know. I just think this is an unmitigated disaster one way or another that is distracting, as I was alluding to earlier, other priorities. And I think Bondi should be held accountable for releasing this memo that Axios got access to, shortly after passing the One Big Beautiful Bill. I think people could have waited.
Coincidence.
Right. Well, okay. So if it's a coincidence, maybe they thought it would get buried.
I don't think it's a coincidence, for the record.
You think so? Maybe Bondi I don't know why she would hate it, because it's like literally everything they wanted from a judicial point of view and an immigration deportation point of view. But like, she should just be fired on that alone. I don't think there was, correct me if I'm wrong, the panelists here, there was no congressional law saying by this time you have to release it. There was no campaign promises. And if even there was, like, oh, we're gathering more embedded evidence, we're a little bit delayed. Sorry, guys, just give us a second. Why did she release it then? And I just think they have to stick to it. From a political sense, they have to stick to that, because if not, forget it.
to your point, Stefano, when it was released, none of us thought it was real. Like that's how out of the blue it was. We're like
everything else out of it.
Yeah, there's no way this is real. Why would it come out on a Sunday night? And also, considering all and again, I don't know if it's conspiracy or not, but giving all the talk, like the conversations around Israel being involved, it also comes out the night before Netanyahu comes to the United States. I'm like, this can't be real.
They tried. They tried so hard to muddy the waters even more. It seems.
So, yes. Can we just acknowledge that? Look, again, it goes back to the straight, because I think a lot of people here were talking about the media. A lot of the information that we got from the Epstein came from mainstream media, came from news organization. The memo came from Axios. Like, and I think this is kind of the irony of the situation where people have always blasted it. It's like, no, these are like, we would not have known about Acosta all this if it wasn't for the Miami Herald. Full stop. In the first Trump administration. I mean, Jason. I know there's more people.
I wish Nick had stuck around. Obviously, he had connection issues. But Bryant, who was here very briefly in the beginning, he tried to go to the mainstream media with the flight logs, with the Black Book, and remember, it was Gawker. Okay, that's my point. It's the tabloids. It's the tabloids. TMZ 20 plus years later doing stuff on 9/11, showing that United 23 was another target, and there were other co-conspirators that we've never heard about. Meanwhile, we got guys down in Guantanamo Bay that his base seems to love and thinks that the super secret squirrel force is down there doing good stuff. They're not. Khalid Sheikh Mohammed, who's never had a real trial, is in military tribunals, and we just accept, that's one of the bad guys. That's one of the bad guys. Look, when we talk about this being the most transparent administration, it doesn't help their case when they say they want to put illegals down in Guantanamo. There was a time in this country in 2008 when every Democrat up there, the Barack star, Hillary Clinton, Joe Biden, along with real people like Dennis Kucinich and Mike Gravel, said, we're going to close Guantanamo. Why? Because we had a more educated populace that wasn't just celebritarded out and social media'd up. And they were like, hey, this is bad news. We don't want to be in the Middle East. We don't want unaccountable military facilities that CIA guy just talk crap about John Kiriakou, the one decent human being in the Central Intelligence Agency, when there were many reports that we were torturing these people, that we were waterboarding them. And you look at Abu Ghraib, waterboarding would have been a picnic. Just see what was published there. Thank God for people like Kiriakou. Okay.
So I think Abu Ghraib, though, I do want to highlight, because one of my units was there. I was part of a military police battalion as an active, and I think I know people talk about the CIA and all that, and I got it. That it was a prison, there was no interrogation. That was the torture and all that was 100% a military police unit that went absolutely nuts. And I would say the fact that more people were not held accountable, and then just kind of ended at those, like, that should have gone all the way up the chain of command, because I believe it was a colonel who led the investigation there, and he laid it out in one of our classes in the briefing. He laid out, this was a failure. Again, I know people are going to say of absolute the chain of command, and he even said more people should have been held accountable. And I think, to your point, they just wanted this to move on, even though there was a clear understanding that this was unacceptable. And they tried to not release the images. They tried to that had to be released to the American public, because that is it. But it goes to my point. I think that's where we realize that a lot of this sometimes we're not going to know unless we have, we have our influencers, we have our Twitter, we have that. But look, mainstream media plays a role. And a lot of the information we have here is because of these investigative reporters that could have done better in the past, 100%. But I think that's what we're not going to know more until more of that happens. And I just think, to end this out, David, I think the Trump administration has to do something, either stick to it or figure something out, because at this point, maybe it's the solution is firing Bondi, because I can tell you right now, if Dan Bongino goes, what you thought was a crisis within MAGA, if Don Bongino goes and Bondi stays,
that would be bigger than this story. 100%. 100% bigger than this story. If you think we're doing a lot of spaces on this, We just rename Mario's channel the Bongino Coverage channel.
I just feel if people are fired, but there's still no answers, it doesn't solve anything for the dissidents that are already upset about this. If heads don't roll and there's no explanation, if Bongino becomes a hero, he can be a Snowden. Say the truth about what problem you have with Bondi, be a whistleblower, and then you're our new Snowden or Assange. That's what I would like to pitch to.
Yeah, but then still nobody goes to jail. And let me just make the point to Stefano. I totally agree with him that the mainstream media has a place. In fact, a lot of my reporting, the vast majority of it, is from mainstream reports. How else would I back up what I'm saying unless I was on the road for the last 100+ years gathering this information? The problem is that you get these little tiny morsels of truth here and there, and it's a buffet of lives on the narrative bin, okay? And there's constantly a narrative out there that doesn't fit with the facts, just these convenient things that they want to focus on or misrepresent purposely. That's my biggest point. And I would just say this, if people want to see that, all my docs are free. Fabled Enemies, Loose Change Final Cut, Invisible Empire, and Shade. They're free. My channel on YouTube, Jason Burmis, go check them out. Find out whether or not I told you the truth about the FBI and the military-industrial complex on 9/11. Find out that Joe Biden met with the money man in Pakistan behind 9/11. You talk about the congressional investigation. That was Porter Goss and Bob Graham. Porter Goss and Bob Graham also having breakfast with that same gentleman in D.C. that morning. I've got Bob Graham in the movie talking about that meeting with General Mahmoud Ahmed, who gave him that money. What does Porter Goss do after that? Becomes the head of the Central Intelligence Agency. There is a tier that goes beyond left, right, Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, and we have to find a way to pierce that tier.
Taurus, I do want to ask you one question because you mentioned that they have to pick a lane and stay in it. But at this point in time, which lane do you pick? Because whatever they say, you could have play opposite. There is no more files. But then Trump just did this long post saying, guess what? There are more files, but they're created by the Democrats. So it doesn't seem like there's really anywhere to go from here because whatever you say, there's nothing else or there's more stuff, you have them on the other side. So to me, this just seems like a total disaster and there's really no way out except just, bury it in some type of long drawn out investigation because you can't make anybody satisfied.
I think on that note, what do you think, Stefano?
Yeah, I think it's time. We do have to wrap. I mean, look, it's been almost 2 hours. We had a long list of guests. David, as always, thank you very much for being a fellow co-host with me in this.
Great conversation. Thank you.
And but we're gonna have a lot. So to all our listeners and viewers here, please make sure you follow everybody here. David, Josiah, Dave, Steven, Nate the lawyer, Jason, and then we had Brian Cricket. And I think I'm missing somebody. And if I am, I apologize. But with that being said, again, thank you so much for joining us. We are definitely going to have another one this week. So make sure you're following Mario's account to track it. And always stay in the loop because we definitely always have breaking news spaces or the live streams coming in because the news is 24/7 and we always cover it 24/7. And with that, thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks for
Peace out. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody.
And it was great meeting everybody here.